Hi, guys, and welcome back to Mental Health Pit Stops with me, Hope. On this month's topic, I wanted us to look at anxiety versus anxiousness, as I've already spoken about how mental health has been a big topic of conversation in recent years, and I believe lots more people are talking openly about their mental health and how they're feeling. Of course, we still have some suffering in silence, and I've mentioned that, that stigma and that taboo that's attached to mental health. But I suppose my question is, do we really know the difference between mental health, which we all have, and a mental illness that affects 1 in 4 of us? Now, I decided to pick anxiety as a topic of conversation instead of looking at the other various mental illnesses that people can struggle with, because when I look at anxiety, that is the topic that most people do talk a lot about. If I walk into a staff room, classroom, I hear parents and carers talking. Anxiety is that buzzword that people do tend to talk about. So let's get into it. Anxiety is a complex emotional state that can manifest into various forms. Now, there are many forms of anxiety, but I'm just going to give you the main four. So the first one is general anxiety disorder. Now, this involves that chronic worry about everyday events or things that might happen in the future, or even worrying about past events that are out of your control. Social anxiety is that intense fear of, being judged in social situations, or, constantly thinking you're being watched. It's that irrational thinking, those voices in your head that you can't really control, that are basically telling you what people are thinking and saying. You then have specific phobias, and they are that overwhelming fear of maybe a particular object or even an animal, or even can be a situation. And when I say phobia, it's that chronic fear that your body goes into that overdrive, that meltdown, and you have that out of body experience. For example, when people have phobias of spiders, or even being sick as a phobia. And then finally, you have that panic disorder, and it's basically described as an unexpected panic attack. You have no control of when it happens, and when it does, you have that shortness of breath. Again, it's that outer body experience. And when I say panic disorder, that's when they happen more regularly than a panic attack. Now, we've all probably experienced maybe having those panic attacks, and they do take time for us to control and get our body back into that neutral state. Now let's look at anxiety versus anxiousness. It's important that we distinguish between anxiety and the feeling of being anxious. Now, anxiety is that chronic and persistent feeling that makes everyday life really difficult, and sometimes it really stops you from doing daily activities. With those intense symptoms like panic attacks, for example, or feeling sick to the bottom of your stomach. Now, feeling anxious is also a really intense feeling, but remember, it's temporary, and it can only be linked to, say, maybe specific causes, with like milder symptoms from anxiety, such as, when we've done that job interview and we do have that knot in our stomach and we do feel sick, but it actually is what keeps us going and keeps us prepared for that interview. Or if we put it to a young person, it's when they're revising for a test, or maybe that they're struggling to come into school because they've had the weekend to themselves of their own routine, and then there's that struggle. Now, these are the anxiousness feelings. Anxiety is when it can stop you from doing those daily activities, and that chronic and persistent feeling, and it's intense. Finally, remember, a little bit of anxiety can be beneficial. As I said, it can help us focus during those important tasks. However, when anxiety becomes unmanageable and interferes with those daily life activities, it might be time to seek some support and some help. Phobias are common, but excessive anxiety requires attention. And remember, we all struggle in different ways, and be kind to yourself. That's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this little snapshot of anxiety versus anxiousness. And this will be my last mental health pit stop before school's out for summer. Woo!